Improvise, adapt, and overcome.
A hacker has allegedly stolen a massive trove of sensitive data, including highly classified defense documents and missile schematics, from a state-run Chinese supercomputer in what could potentially constitute the largest known heist of data from China. And it has been a long time coming. I think you've earned it. The hacker revealed the attack on the February 6th news, social media's channels. I don't remember which one, but it must have gone on for months before that. China may have just taken a blade straight into one of its strategic computing organs, and not a nuisance breach like what we have oftentimes in the United States, not a PR scrape. This is a true wound. Current reporting says a hacker or crew, calling itself Flaming China, claims it stole more than 10 petabytes. Look that up. That's a lot of data from the National Supercomputing Center in Tianjin. That number is obscene. That is big enough to impress idiots. It is big enough to make lazy analysts lose discipline. Now, the claim is huge. The proof is not complete. Some outside researchers who reviewed sample materials said it looks plausible, but the full trove has not been publicly authenticated end to end. Now, here's the part that matters. Shenzhen is not just a building full of machines. It is a node in the Chinese state's power grid for science, industry, government, and likely defense-adjacent work. That means this is not about stolen documents. It is about stolen access to relationships, dependencies, patterns, timelines, research priorities, institutional linkages. That is what professionals hunt, not just the file. The architecture behind the file, not just the blueprint, the nervous system, and this is truly why it matters. People hear supercomputing center and think prestige. Wrong. You should think target. You should think simulation, weapons relevance, modeling, dual-use research, state capacity under glass, because once a strategic compute hub gets cracked open, you do not just lose data, you lose visibility control, and visibility is power. Now, look at the reported access method. A compromised VPN, months inside, distributed exfiltration, small enough movements not to trip any alarms. That is not wizardry. That is not some movie script cyber ninja nonsense. That is a patient operator walking through a system that was either too trusted, too centralized, too blind, or all three. I am really, really surprised to hear something like this take place in China, which, for all intents and purposes, is one of the epicenters of hacking throughout the world. Oh, we do our share as well, but it's much more strategic. It is not unrestricted access like China and some of our other near-peer adversaries perpetrate. And frankly, that's the ugly truth. When a place like this in Tianjin bleeds for months, man, the attacker really deserves credit, but the defender deserves blame, because systems this important are supposed to assume compromise. They're supposed to segment, monitor, trap if they can do it, at least throttle and hunt. And if the reporting on this breach is accurate, somebody failed at that badly. Okay, step back just a minute. China's whole model is built on integration. Civilian research tied to industrial growth tied to national strategy, and national strategy tied to military relevance. That model creates scale. It creates speed and it creates leverage. Unfortunately, in this case, it also created shared vulnerability, because when one node is hit, the damage does not stay politely in one box. It can spill across institutions, sectors, and mission sets. That is the hidden cost of centralization. The same structure that makes the machine strong can also make it brittle. That is the real read here. And make no mistake, the United States is vulnerable to this same type of impactful hacking. We have very much centralized much of our information as well, but not exactly the way that the Chinese are doing it. We trust our people a little more than PRC does. So if this breach is genuine, then China may have taken a huge counterintelligence hit, far more serious than the average cyber headline suggests, because, well, the real value may not be in bomb diagrams or missile renderings or files stamped top secret. The real value may be in the map behind them. Who works with whom? Which projects are active? Which ones are mature? Which institutes share computing? Which software stacks are being used? Which vendors matter? Where are the seams? That is a gift to any serious foreign intelligence service. And if Beijing got caught flat-footed here, then this is not just a cybersecurity problem. It is a massive exposure problem, a governance problem, a compartmentalization problem, a regime competence problem, possibly, because China sells control, discipline, digital sovereignty, systems mastery. A long, quiet bleed from a flagship supercomputing center cuts directly against that myth, and hard. So what are the implications of this breach? Well, first, if the breach is in fact real, this strengthens the view that advanced compute infrastructure is now contested strategic ground, not just support terrain, primary terrain. I think secondly, it gives the United States and our allies more ammunition for tighter controls on chips, software, networking, gear, and research collaboration tied to Chinese high-performance computing. I think number three, it tells every serious government on Earth the same lesson, which is centralized compute creates centralized risk. Fourth, it reminds everyone that the most valuable theft in a modern state may not be cash or plans or platforms. It may be systems comprehension. Do you not understand what is possible? Don't understate it. Don't dismiss too early or declare too much too soon. This breach, it appears plausible and it's potentially serious. It's also potentially strategic. However, temper your excitement, because the public evidence is still, unfortunately, incomplete. However, if this is real, somebody did not just steal Chinese data, they may have stolen a clearer view into how part of the Chinese state actually thinks, how it builds, how it moves. And that's not theft. That is penetration. And I think that's how it is. Welcome to the Carry On Podcast, SITREP edition for the week of April 16th. I am your host, Brad Colbert, the Iceman, and it is a pleasure once again to join you as we dissect portions of the world that are melting down. I am having a hot toddy this evening. I am trying to get a hold of yet another cold. I am having rum in my hot toddy. Traditionally, it would be bourbon or whiskey. Some spices, some other goodies. I'm sure you can find your particularly favorite recipe online. This one's mine, and I'm keeping it to myself. A bit of a witch's brew. So I want to start and recognize our newest Patreon member, Randy. Thank you very much for your support. I appreciate it. All of my Patreon supporters go a long way towards supporting the show, and it is not lost on me. And everyone that is still not yet a Patreon member, your support is incredibly important as well. It's how shows like this grow. If you like what I am doing, then continue to listen. Tell some friends, and we will both grow together. I would also hope that the signed and numbered prints that went out to our top tier Patreon members recently have arrived. Middle and entry-level tiers have something coming their way too. I would ask just for your patience. I'm a one-man show, and I am doing the best that I can to do as many things as I can. Now, I would also like to offer a clarification on a comment I made during the AMA regarding the Royal Marine Commandos. It has come to my attention that certain of my friends across the pond have taken umbrage with a few of my comments, perhaps misinterpreted the intent, so allow me to clarify. The comment was something along the lines of that the Royal Marine Commandos were probably my top-rated fighting force in the world, but they were let down by their training and equipment. I did not mean to insinuate that you were let down internally, that the training that you're conducting is somehow subpar, or that you're incompetent and didn't understand how to use your equipment. That is not at all what I am saying. I'm going to quickly let everyone know that the British Royal Marine Commandos are a part of the Navy in the UK. Roughly combined the two, somewhere around the neighborhood of 23,000. I'm probably a little bit off on my numbers. Now, of that combined, UK Navy and British Royal Marine Commandos, the commandos are only about 3 to 4%. We're talking 3,500 to 4,000 individuals. Tremendously long entry-level process to be selected, a wonderful physical rehabilitation program for those that get hurt along the way. And the outcome of that training is a spectacular individual. Your budget is about 2.5% of your GDP, Britain. And when you compare that to the United States, oh, by the way, that's roughly 60 billion pounds. You compare that to the United States GDP hovering somewhere around 3.5 in the neighborhood of almost just south of $1 trillion US. I'm not going to do the conversion to dollars and pounds to see what those two amounts are. You can do that on your little calculators. Here's my point. How freaking amazing would you commandos be if you had access to American-styled training? I'm talking about 10,000 rounds of ammunition to every range that you go to. In a reconnaissance unit, it was not uncommon for 24 of us, 25 in the platoon, to have access to that amount of ammunition on one day's range. We are afforded the latest and greatest in communications equipment and enablers. That was the only point that I was trying to make, my friends. I was not intending to disparage or denigrate. In fact, I am in constant admiration of what you do with what you have. Wonderful individuals. To bookend this conversation, my point was simply imagine what you could do if instead of occupying such a small percentage of the budget for the UK's military, you had a little bit more. That's all my point was. So, I hope there's no hard feelings. I will raise a glass and have a sip. Hopefully you can do the same and understand that there was a misunderstanding there. All right. Let's move forward into the stories of tonight. I want to begin by discussing a little bit about the China and Iran arms transfer allegation. If you're not tracking this story, well, it's an interesting one. Essentially, the U.S. intelligence assessment was reported on by CNN, and then Reuters further reported on it, saying China was believed to be preparing to send new air defense systems to Iran, potentially within weeks. Now, Trump publicly warned China would face big problems if it followed through. That is an intelligence claim plus a political warning. It doesn't mean that there is confirmation of delivery. China's foreign ministry flatly rejected the allegation as fabricated. Shocker. Said Beijing applies strict military export controls. Fucking liar. And warned it would answer with countermeasures if the U.S. used the accusations as a basis for tariffs. Now, understand that the three aforementioned expletives is my opinion. If you would like, I can do a deep dive into this where I can show you sites and sources that support that expletive. But I'm not going to do that this evening. We'll punt that until next week. China is wrapping that denial in diplomacy. A lot of ceasefire language, shipping lane stability, and international law. This allegation does not emerge from empty air. Okay? The source, Reuters, AP, CNN, notes prior U.S. Treasury actions going back to 2025 involving PRC and Hong Kong-linked entities tied to Iranian missile propellant and UAV procurement networks. Now, that does not prove Beijing has now today authorized direct state weapon shipments, but it does mean that Chinese linked channels have already shown up in Iran's defense supply ecosystem. It is traceable, regardless of what their political denials may add up to. If the intelligence is right, this is not China openly entering the fight. So I want to make that clear. It is gray zone reinforcement. I'm talking about limited, deniable support meant to stiffen Iran's air defense picture, complicate a lot of low altitude operations, which is what we're doing, and signal Tehran is not isolated. And we've talked about who might come to their aid. Would Russia, would other countries, how are they sustaining their fight once their existing stockpiles deplete, which could be freaking months based off of some of the things that I have read about what they actually have in the inventory. But battlefield effect would likely be modest if this story is in fact borne out. And I kind of want to throw this out now. We'll most likely never know with 100% certainty whether they did or didn't, whether they were going to or were not going to. The strategic signaling of all of this, though, would be much larger than the actual deliveries. China appears to be running a dual track strategy. First, it's protecting its Gulf access and Iranian equities, all while avoiding visible ownership of any type of escalation. And that is the real play here. Publicly, they're a diplomat, quietly, if true, enabler. The first danger is not immediate U.S.-China collision. It is economic escalation. The allegation itself can be weaponized into tariff threats, countermeasures, sanctions pressure, and customs scrutiny. That turns an intelligence report into a broader coercive contest. Tariffs, for example. The second danger is the routing architecture, because if the transfer is real, it likely moves through deniable commercial layers. And we've talked about this before, not overt state channels. And that shifts the fight towards a lot of interdiction, a lot of partner state pressure where these things are flowing through. Of course, sanctions enforcement and attribution battles, which is really meaningless. There is a credible reported U.S. intelligence concern here, though. So let's not miss this. A direct Chinese denial and a real prior pattern of Chinese-linked entities appearing in Iranian military procurement networks. We know this for a fact. What you don't have here with this story is public proof of delivery or proof of some kind of central PRC decision to arm Iran as a overt state policy. And I really think that distinction matters, because it's easy to blur this distinction. Don't do that. Right now, this is a live story. It's not a settled fact. So we'll keep our eye on it. A lot of the shipment claims are resting on reported intelligence. Nothing has been released as in the way of evidence. Beijing is clearly denying. We are using past as prologue here when it comes to the prior procurement network. It increases the plausibility that they're doing it again, but it doesn't prove anything. It is credible reporting, but it's under dispute. It's not established fact. We'll continue to track this story. And if it changes, if it gets bigger, I'm going to let you know. So let's keep this going on as long as we're on the topic of Iran. Obviously, the United States and Iran are currently in the middle of a negotiation. It is being brokered by Pakistan, which is odd to me. To me, it's not who I would have thought would have served as the mediator, as duplicitous as Pakistan is. Not my first choice, but honestly, anything that brings these two countries to the table to try and negotiate an armistice or a peace or a treaty or insert name of negotiated settlement here, hey man, I'm all for it. But right now, the situation has become even narrower and a lot more transactional. I'm pulling this information from Reuters, who's now reporting the parties both are discussing an interim memorandum rather than some grand settlement with a lot of disputes still centered on Iran's, shocker, enriched uranium stockpile. The duration of any enrichment being halted, some sanctions relief, maritime access linked to the Strait of Hormuz. We'll get there. Pakistan is the key intermediary, but Islamabad is currently saying that no new rounds of negotiations are formally set. So I guess a second round of U.S.-Iran talks may happen as early as this weekend, but that remains purely tentative. Pakistan's foreign ministry said today that no dates have been set, even as a lot of other other countries in the area are, including Turkey, actually, publicly pushing for both sides to keep the track alive. Active diplomatic motion, weak procedural certainty. At the same time, the military pressure architecture is not easing at all. It is the absolute quintessential walk softly and carry a big stick. The Pentagon says U.S. forces, well, they're ready to resume strikes if ordered, and American maritime pressure, and we'll talk about this in the next story, has widened beyond a local blockade into a much broader campaign against Iran-linked shipping across the board. So in my mind, it tells you that talks are not happening in a de-escalated environment. Both sides are really negotiating under threat. The nuclear file remains the center of gravity here, and rightfully so. Reuters reports Washington wants a far longer halt to enrichment than Tehran is willing to accept, while Iran wants sanctions relief, access to a lot of frozen money, and recognition of peaceful nuclear activity. Reuters is also reporting that there is a discussion of partial transfer of Iran's highly enriched uranium to a third country as part of an interim arrangement. I kind of saw this one coming, and we've talked about this in previous episodes. It really is the most elegant solution. You put the kid's cookies in a jar and you put it on a top shelf, and when the child wants the cookie, then you give him the cookie. Otherwise, all the cookies are gone, and that's not good, right? Hormuz is still the second pressure point here. A lot of U.S. officials are saying maritime coercion is part of the strategy to reopen the trade routes, force a lot of leverage. Iran, well, they're signaling that safer maritime passage could be part of a broader deal. And that means a lot of this sea security is not a side issue. It's one of the currencies that are being bargained. The real sticking point in my mind, and this is why I'm mentioning it, is verification. That's the hard reality check. The IAEA has repeatedly said meaningful progress depends on restoring inspections and verification access in Iran. To put it another way, trust but verify. I don't personally believe anything that is coming out of the Iranian regime's mouth. You are promising with your fingers crossed behind your back. Without enforcement, any announcement is purely political theater, dressed up as diplomacy. Oh, and let's not forget the Lebanon front. That's still contaminating a lot of the negotiations. There's 10-day Israel-Lebanon cessation of hostilities. Well, that took effect today. And both the Associated Press and the State Department frame it as a step meant to support a much wider negotiation. But Israeli forces are still in a security zone. Hezbollah is warning against normalizing that reality, and the broader regional system is still very unstable. So I don't think any serious look at this should treat U.S.-Iran track as insulated from Lebanon. Just understand that everything that I am pulling is based off of stuff that I found up to and including today. A lot of public messaging, State Department, White House press briefings, messaging from Washington and Tehran, really. Oh, and some intermediaries like Islamabad. Heavily performative. The most reliable indicators of any substance are whether this weekend's second round is formally scheduled, and also whether the IAEA gets access in, hard written concrete terms that they can execute. There's also that huge kerfuffle about Hormuz. A lot of the pressure needs to be loosened rather than just being rhetorical. And let's talk about it. Let's talk a little bit about the U.S. force posture and also the blockade. Let's do it in one package. The United States currently is building a broader, I would say, coercive architecture against Iran that combines a lot of forward military mass with a maritime blockade. The force buildup we've talked about, but we're going to talk about it a little more now. And the blockade, they're not separate stories. They're the same story, just told through different instruments. One creates muscle and the other applies the squeeze. Washington has not formally blockaded the Strait of Hormuz itself. So I want everybody to understand that. There is no one that is prohibited in either perpetuity or scope from transiting the Strait of Hormuz. The public policy, as stated by the White House, is much narrower. They are blocking ships that are entering or exiting Iranian ports and coastal areas while ensuring freedom of navigation from non-Iranian ports. And I mean, that's the Americans' legal position currently, one that I'm struggling to find an issue with. Unless you're Iranian or somebody who consumes whatever it is that the Iranians are trying to put on a ship and export, then you probably disagree with me. But yeah, blocking the ships from entering these ports while allowing others to move freely is, I think, a good thing in this case. That's an opinion. Operationally, this whole region is already behaving like a quasi-blockade battle space where a lot of commercial traffic is adapting under this pressure. A lot of force presence is being expanded to keep that pressure going in the case that diplomacy fails. Current count that I was able to look at today, 13 ships confirmed redirected as of my finished touching on this brief. But I've also had some issues with that number because I'm seeing something that says 14 as well. It matters, but not because 14 is a magic number. It matters because it shows that the United States is already shaping behavior without yet needing a large-scale contested interdiction. The U.S. force, not just naval ships, but ground troops into theater includes expeditionary packages built for endurance, deterrence, and rapid escalation. We've reported on those in previous SITREPs. Marines, 2 MEUs, sailors, a lot of littoral combat ships. The reporting that I've read in the briefings say that the presence or movement of the U.S. aircraft carrier, the George Bush Strike Group, the Boxer Amphibious Readiness Group, that's MEU number 1, 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit on there, alongside a broader Army force. We've spoken about the 82nd Airborne Division elements of. This is not symbolic. This is not token numbers. I mean, this is a real force posture that could support blockade enforcement. It could also do a lot of mine clearing. We've talked about the strike options that those Marines and soldiers could potentially perform. And obviously a lot of crisis response, right? If something goes pear-shaped, both aforementioned ground forces can help with that. If negotiations collapse entirely, well, then the carrier strike group and a lot of the supporting vessels are poised to resume combat operations. At the maritime level, CENTCOM announced the blockade policy on the 12th of April, and it went into effect on April 13th. So it's pretty new on the block. It's being framed as an action against any shipping that is tied to Iranian ports. It's not against the international waterway. They're screening ships. I don't know the mechanisms under which they're doing it. I'm sure that's reported elsewhere. I didn't capture for this. It pairs that policy with a lot of mine clearing operations. It has stated, at least General Dan Kane has stated, that Iran has laid mines in the strait. He's also said that this blockade applies to all ships, regardless of nationality, whether they're going into or from Iranian ports. Meanwhile, he is also insisting it is not a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. I'm trying to reconcile those two things. So if it applies to all ships, regardless of nationality, heading into or out of Iranian ports, but you're insisting that, anyways, they're letting everyone non-entry or exit into Iran through the strait, doing some mine clearing operations, and it's a big show of force because this enforcement picture is real, but it's not airtight. Some vessels have been reported as being turned back to avoid confrontation in the first place. Others reporting that traffic has still entered the Gulf, in some cases adapting by using Iran-directed routing near the coast rather than fully disengaging. So that means that it's not total maritime control, because if the United States ships are not willing to interdict vessels that are basically hugging the littoral of Iran to skirt interdiction attempts, then, like I said, it's not an airtight blockade. It's not total maritime control. It is a coercive regime that is already changing behavior, the Iranians, but still contains a lot of gaps, improvisations, and a lot of room for friction. Also, the official U.S. messaging makes the strategic intent here rather obvious. The administration and President Trump is signaling that diplomacy remains open, but only under visible combat readiness and a lot of pretty overt enforcement power. So in plain language, I would say Washington wants Tehran negotiating under a gun, not under a handshake. This is a lot of coercive bargaining with forced posture. I think the U.S. is trying to do two things at once. They're maintaining negotiating leverage during a very fragile diplomatic phase. And, they're preserving the ability to restart the war. That is why a lot of this buildup and blockade, it has to be read together and not in isolation. In all of this conflict with the strait, the center of gravity here is really economic warfare. The blockade's true target is Iran's ability to move energy or commerce or sanctions evasion. If we can stop that, you could potentially, theoretically, in theory, which is the same thing, choke Iran financially. And it allows vessels to transit through the Strait of Hormuz, which heretofore there has been a lot of trepidation in doing. It's exorbitantly expensive, even if the United States does provide at least a guard at the door to the Strait of Hormuz, if not escorting people all the way. The insurance companies backing these vessels have still not dropped the rate of insurance to pre-Iran conflict levels, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. So any of the goods and services that are going through the strait are still carrying a premium compared to, 5 months ago. The force buildup that's taking place exists in part to make a very credible pressure against Iran and make it sustainable. You have to have combat power if you're going to do a blockade. Otherwise, it's a bluff. The U.S. is definitely doing both. They are saying that it is blockaded, and they are backing up that statement. Washington is trying to preserve a lot of useful legal and political distinction here. They're blocking Iran, not Hormuz, and that distinction is going to hold in a briefing room. But I think it's going to weaken in the real world, especially with our allies and neutral countries. I think commercial shipping as a whole, as I said, responds a lot to mines and insurance exposure. not to American legal phrasing. So unless there's a declared opening of the strait, I don't see that changing. And even without a declared closing of the strait, as we've seen, the practical effect is a sharply more dangerous and distorted traffic environment. We talked last week about the toll booth Iran was trying to enforce, basically a toll to pass through the strait, regardless of the fact that, they have no legal grounds to stand on there. So really, a lot of the impacts don't have to be enforced. They just have to be publicly stated. And that we've seen 125, 150 ships not transiting through the strait. There's also a lot of evidence of mission expansion. I think both briefs are reporting that maritime campaign may extend beyond the immediate Gulf battle space, and it could potentially target Iran-linked shipping much more broadly. I mean, we have seen Iranian ships out in the open ocean become interdicted. That's a big hinge point, because once a lot of this enforcement shifts from a local blockade to a wider distributed interdiction, then this is not just a choke point. This starts to resemble a much larger campaign against Iran's total trade network. Yeah. A couple of implications. This is not de-escalation. This is just diplomacy conducted under the gun. The force flow that's taking place, it's meant to make the United States threats much more credible and the Iranian resistance much more expensive. I think the second implication is this blockade creates an economic choke pressure. It provides the means to enforce it, protect it, and expand it if it's challenged. The 13 or 14 redirected ships, the fact that those were redirected show a lot of behavior changes, behavioral shaping. They don't prove airtight control of the maritime domain in that area, but I mean, they are demonstrative that it's working. Putting more ships, more American ships, more aircraft, more Marines, mines in the water, commercial rerouting, and a lot of the broader interdiction authority. All of this together really increases the odds that a boarding of a vessel or a warning shot, a missile event, something interdicts, something isn't interdicted, or a fast boat encounter, that's going to trigger a much larger chain reaction. Lastly, I think if the United States follows through on targeting Iran-linked shipping outside of the immediate blockade zone, I think this whole thing then takes on a much broader scale, a much broader campaign. Against Iranian trade and sanction evasion networks across the board, not just a local enforcement action. So we'll see. I don't know. I opinion time. So I'm throwing it out there now. I'm kind of mixed on this one. I understand what the United States is trying to accomplish here. I do. But how long can we do it? Are you going to do it until there's a negotiated peace between Iran and the United States? And what happens if it doesn't? I guess I'm a little cautious about this one simply because I don't clearly know from the administration standpoint what comes next. Now, I have my own opinions about this. This is not an enduring mission set that we can sustain. The United States cannot dedicate the 7th Fleet, the 5th Fleet, it doesn't matter what number, to this mission set for the year, for the next year. We just can't do it, nor should we have to. So something's got to give. I'm just curious to know what is going to give if the negotiations or the peace summit, or I don't know what word to put on it, that doesn't work out. How long are we prepared to do this? We have not done a very good job of bringing into the fold some of our allies. In fact, we really, aside from Israel, haven't had any allies. It's not entirely true. There's some countries that are helping out behind the scenes quietly, not really doing it publicly. I read a very interesting story that Saudi Arabia a while back, and I may have mentioned this in last week or the week before, did make overtures to the United States when tensions were last escalated with Iran that, and I'm paraphrasing here, that we should just take them out completely. Saudi Arabia has had its hand bitten by the Iranians. It extended in peace. The Iranians bit it. That really ticked off the Saudis. And so there was a time where they were petitioning us to, and by us, I mean the United States, to go full kinetic. We will track this as we always do. I don't know what it's going to look like after the weekend is up. Cautiously optimistic, I guess I would say. All right. I would like to end this evening's discussion on a U.S. policy that some of you may or may not be familiar with. If you are an American citizen, this is probably something that is of a concern to you. But I got news for you. It may be a United States, how do I phrase this? Law. It's not really a law. I mean, it is, but policy, I think, is the better way to discuss it in this context. It affects everybody on the planet. And Section 702 is the FISA extension fight that is currently taking place in Washington, and everybody's involved. And I mean everybody. All two branches of government at this point. The United States has three: the executive, the legislative, and the executive. Thank you, Civics Class 101. The Supreme Court, the judicial, they're not weighing in on it, but the legislative, Congress, both houses are, and there is a contentious debate that's taking place, which honestly, I can't understand why, because we have had this. Let's get into the story, because there's a bit of history here. Right now, Washington is not debating whether to keep this very powerful foreign surveillance weapon active, because it is. The debate is how Washington is going to change it. Well, actually, let me rephrase that. It's how little it can change and still get the votes. Section 702, it remains one of the U.S. intelligence system's most valuable collection authorities and also one of its most politically radioactive. The White House wants an 18-month extension with minimal disruption. Reformers want a much harder guardrail, especially a warrant requirement before agencies search for Americans' communications inside the data already collected. The machine, it's very effective. The machine is also very invasive. That contradiction is the center of gravity with this debate. Many of you are probably asking, the fuck are you talking about? What is Section 702? I'm glad you asked. It authorizes collection targeting non-United States persons reasonably believed to be outside the United States for foreign intelligence purposes. Americans cannot be targeted under 702 itself. That is a legal protection. But the reality is that Americans' communications still get pulled in when they interact with those foreign targets, and that's the vulnerability. A lot of critics are calling this a backdoor search problem because once the pool of data exists, then agencies can query it in ways that surface U.S. persons' communications without a traditional warrant. It's nuanced, it's wonky, it's not exactly as cut and dry as that makes it seem. There's a little more to it than that. But let's leave that alone for the moment and keep going. Right now, what's happening right now? Well, Congress, for whatever reason, is under a self-imposed deadline pressure. The statute, I said policy, finally, there's the word I was looking for, statute. It faces an April 20th, so we're coming up on it quick, sunset fight. The White House is pushing, just wants a clean 18-month renewal. And the public argument is, well, it's national security. Iran, Venezuela, a lot of hostile actors, foreign threats. There's no time to hesitate. We need this thing instituted right now. The real fight that's taking place, though, is it's institutional. The entire intelligence community, of which there are 18 intelligence apparatus in the United States, that entire community wants continuity. So they don't want to wait and see if there's a gap. A cross ideological block of a lot of civil libertarians, a lot of critics, a lot of privacy hawks, a lot of anti-surveillance members want much tighter control over the United States person queries, a lot of stricter limits on data exploitation. This is not what Edward Snowden spilled. This is not that. This is something different. This does not specifically target the metadata of U.S. citizens living in the United States. This is strictly outside of the United States borders, involving foreign citizens and a aggregation of targeted metadata on their communication. So it could be anything. Cell phones, it could be emails, it could be, I don't know. If in that collection, you just so happen to get a conversation between somebody who is based in the United States, talking to somebody who is outside of the United States, a foreign national in this case, okay? There's a whole suite of protections afforded to that U.S. individual. That's something that this story misses. And it's not because I don't want to talk about it, but it's because I don't want to talk about it. Because I am not going to reveal methods and sources over the internet, okay? And that's just the way that's going to be. But I will say that there's more to it than that, okay? So I think people are becoming a little bit alarmist, but that's my opinion. Let's stick with the facts and we'll wrap this up at the end. U.S. person queries, they want a lot more stricter controls on those, a lot more limits on data exploitation. And this is not a competition between the left and the right in America. It's not a competition between the Democrats and the Republicans. And as usual, each one have ideological difficulties with each other. And that's what this is about. It's not. It is state power versus those that distrust state power. I think the operational reality here, as I said, I think the panic narrative is grossly overstated. Even for two reasons. Okay, so one, even if the statute sunsets, the collection, it doesn't shut off instantly. The Section 702 runs through annual FISA court certifications, and those certifications can preserve continuity beyond any statutory expiration. That means the line that America goes blind the second Congress misses the deadline, that's baloney. It's not true. It's not the full legal truth. The system has much more elasticity than a lot of the news headlines admit. Okay, so I think it's probably appropriate at this point for me to explain a little more on what the heck I'm talking about when I keep saying FISA court. Many of those listening who are U.S. citizens have at least heard that term before. For those of you that may not, I'm going to explain it. And for those of us that have a global audience this evening, then buckle in, because let me explain something about how the United States intelligence apparatus works. FISA is an acronym. It stands for Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. And a FISA court is FISC, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. Now, this is a United States court that is very specialized. It is secret, not that it is a secret that it exists. It's the comings and goings, what takes place behind the door in the gavel and the dude with the robes and all that stuff. That's secret. U.S. federal court established this way back in 1978. It was a mechanism that was needed at that time and still to this day to review and approve surveillance warrants against foreign powers and agents inside the United States. So if the United States wants to look into the comings and goings or activities of somebody that they reasonably suspect is committing some type of act against the United States, this is the court they go to for a warrant. Yeah, that's true. And that applies to foreigners in the United States. The protections afforded to a U.S. citizen are, a little bit different than those that aren't U.S. citizens, but you still have to get permission to be invasive, whether it's physical or electronic. And that's what this court is designed to do. They review warrants and they approve them. It acts as a check on intelligence gathering. So there are 11 federal judges who preside over these warrant applications for electronic surveillance and physical searches. And then I'm talking about warrant requests from agencies like the FBI or the NSA, or you get the idea. Any of the three letters that you can think of, they all go before the FISA court. Now, the purpose of the FISA court is it handles surveillance requests concerning foreign intelligence information. It reviews those applications, these warrant request applications under the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, FISA. Title I refers to surveillance and Title III refers to physical searches. Now, here's the fun little statistic. Approval rates. And this is one of the things that the detractors of 702 are using as evidence. The court is known for a near perfect approval rating. From 1979 to 2006, out of over 22,000 applications, 5 were rejected. 5. Denials are extremely rare, with some years having 0 rejections. So the way it works is the FISC operates, as I said, in complete secrecy with only government evidence presented to the court. You're not going to go to the person who you want to surveil and ask them to petition evidence against the warrant. That's not really how it works in any criminal court. Yeah. It often meets completely in private to review the applications, ensuring they comply with legal standards. The criticism concerns are that it is this closed, non-adversarial proceedings. You do not allow anyone in there other than the person making the petition for the warrant and the, I don't know how many sit. I don't know if they convene all 11 or whomever is reviewing the warrant, if it's a rotating basis. And those are the only people that are in there. And that bothers people. And I get their point, right? The United States tries to act in a transparent fashion. We have Freedom of Information Act, where the individual U.S. citizen can write into the government and say, I want to know what is in box 3, shelf 4, row 7 in the, archives, in the constitutional archives, or not constitutional. God bless America. I have forgotten the building in DC that has the National Archives. That's what I was trying to articulate. You can do that. You can submit a request for information under the Freedom of Information Act to almost any government agency and ask for a thing. You can ask whether it's the NSA or the CIA or the FBI. Now, what you get back may be a white piece of paper with a huge chunk of black redaction on it, but you can ask. The fact that it is done in a closed door setting and with an extraordinarily high approval rate bothers a lot of people. The critics, as I've said, they argue that a lot of this process, it lacks transparency and there is very little to no accountability. So the judges, they are designated by the Chief Justice of the United States, and they represent at least 7 judicial circuits. I don't want to go down a rabbit hole about the makeup of the court systems in the United States. Just understand that's a large swath of the United States, and at least 3 reside near DC. A lot of the oversight bodies are saying 2 things at once, and they both matter. First, Section 702 remains one of the country's most valuable foreign intelligence tools, and they're right. Second, the compliance story is better, but not clean. A lot of post-reform data show FBI U.S. person query compliance improved substantially, and improper evidence of a crime queries reportedly dropped out of the reviewed period. Query volumes also fell sharply. That means that the court's scrutiny is working, but sensitive queries involving political, media, and religious figures increased significantly. And oversight bodies flagged a lot of technical weaknesses and unresolved concerns about how all of this data is being filtered and used, because it's not transparent. So the system has tightened under pressure, but didn't stop pressing its own boundaries. Because the real issue is no longer raw collection alone, the real issue is a lot of downstream use, querying, filtering, sharing, repurposing. The state, the United States, it's not losing the authority to surveil foreigners abroad. That authority is politically durable. The fight is over whether the government can continue treating incidentally collected American communications as something it can reach into with fewer constraints than a normal warrant process would require. And that right there is the fault line. That is where a lot of the future legal and political damage will hit. I don't know how this one's going to shake out. I think my assessment of everything that's taking place with 702 is that the U.S. surveillance infrastructure is not retracting in any way. It's just probably going to be refined. I think a lot of the external threats that America is currently facing is being used as justification. Iran, China, Russia, a lot of these transnational networks that we've spoken about, they're all real threats. And in this case, they're very useful. I think third, Congress is being forced to operate inside of this manufactured urgency. The deadline, it's real, but the idea of immediate blindness behind it is not. You can take your time. A lot of reforms improved discipline in the past, but not legitimacy, compliance. A lot of the compliance will rise while public trust keeps eroding. And there has been. The deeper pattern here remains unchanged. The scale of it, the secrecy behind it, and a lot of the convenience, it keeps outrunning democratic tolerance. Kind of put the period at the end of this. I think the debate is not over whether the United States should possess empire-grade surveillance capabilities. It already does. This is a fight over whether Congress will once again ratify that capability with cosmetic restraint or force a much more serious check on how Americans who just happen to be collected in this are accessed. Section 702 is very useful, and it's very invasive. And anyone pretending only one of those statements is true is biased. I think that's probably it on the 702. I think it's going to get extended if I was to pick a way to go right now, but there is enough of a dissent where it may not pass. It may not. It may be in for a fight. How do I feel about that? I don't know. There's certain things about 702 I'm just not going to speak about, and some of those things temper my opinion on it, and that's pretty much the end of that story. So, in addition to being the end of the story, I am out of hot toddy. I clearly need... Wait, hold on. Now I'm out. So I need a refill. You may as well. That's the SITREP for the week of April 16th. Tune in because the weekend could be real interesting depending on which way the wind blows in Washington and Tehran. China, I think, is fine for the moment. We can scoop them up next week. Speaking of which, we have a wonderful episode that is going to get dropped, a one-on-one interview with an expert on China. I think I've foreshadowed it before. You don't want to miss it, and you'll get to a sneak peek if you are subscribing to the newsletter. That's it for this evening. This is Brad Colbert, the Iceman, as always, reminding all of you out there to stay frosty.
Improvise, adapt, and